Welcome and thank you very much for joining us on episode 127 of the Blazers Edge Weekend Podcast, aka the Jerry Stackcast, presented to you today by BlazersEdge.com. I'm your weekend host, Chris Lucia.
I'm your weekend co-host, Brandon Goldner. If you want to get in touch with the Blazers Edge Weekend Podcast, you can always shoot us an email at blazersedgepodcast@gmail.com. We would love for you to rate, review, and subscribe to us on both iTunes and Stitcher. And don't forget to also subscribe to our YouTube channel. We would very much appreciate it.
Joining us this weekend on the Blazers Edge podcast is news editor for Blazers Edge, David MacKay. David, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. It was fun to see you early last week at Blazers Edge dinner because I noticed an interesting dichotomy between you and Brandon. I think he came to dinner right after work. He was kind of in a rush. Showed up, with the nice dress shoes, with the khakis. He had his nice button-up shirt. He had his tie, his hair combed real nice. And then Dave, you strolled in. I believe you were wearing the Adidas soccer slides. Am I right on that?
Yeah, you are. I like to be comfortable, and I think my feet are really pretty.
You do have pretty feet. It's too bad that
Thank
you don't.
you.
The only thing is, I was kind of disappointed that you didn't have painted toenails, because when I think of David MacKay, I think of painted toenails. So you should get on that.
You want to know a secret?
Yeah, what's up?
I've got clear coat on from a pedicure.
Bam! I need to slide in there and get my nails done right.
I fully advise you to do it. It's really, nice massage, complimentary wine, an hour in a massage chair.
Well, and I don't mean to take this too far off the rails, but when I get my hair cut, they do like a little kind of massage thing. If you have to pay extra for it, they'll shampoo your hair and do the massage. It's super, super relaxing. And if you haven't done that, I recommend all of our listeners go out and do that right now. But getting off the fashion talk, David, so you have been a Blazers reporter. I mean, we worked together at Rip City Project for another number of years. You were my editor there before I came over to Blazers Edge, and now you're here. You can give me full credit for that. But you've been a reporter for a long time, and so you were actually at practice today, and we are recording. Today's Friday, April 8th. And so you were at the Blazers practice today, and you sent over some videos that we got up on Facebook and retweeted on Twitter. But I was wondering, now that the Blazers have clinched the playoffs, and obviously they only have 2 games left as of airing, they haven't yet played the Timberwolves game, but I don't think they can finish any lower than 7th as we stand today. But they're going to make the playoffs. Was there any difference in what you experienced in the tone or the body language or the tenor of the practice with either the coaches or the players or even the organization? Are they getting locked into the playoffs? Was there any difference in the emotion at the practice facility that you could tell?
Honestly, I think everyone was just really focused on the games that are coming up. They all know the playoffs are around the corner, and some of the younger guys are excited about it. And you can just kind of see it on their faces. When they're talking, they have more energy to them. But for the most part, you can ask around, and they'll just say, oh, we're looking forward to the Timberwolves, and we want to make sure we get that 5th seed, because it's really important to them that they move up and get the best spot possible. But at the same time, there's definitely a positive energy.
Would you say, David, they sound confident about snagging that number 5 seed and keeping that, and then heading in to the playoffs and into that number 4-5 seed matchup?
Oh, I think, to be a professional athlete, you have to be confident in your abilities in the first place. But yeah, I that's where their mind is. They want that 5th seed, and I think they'll get there.
I think this is kind of, business as usual for the Blazers, right? I mean, this is pretty much what you kind of expected from this team heading into the playoffs, right?
Yeah. I think they're in a good place mentally. I think health-wise, everyone's where they need to be. Dame said that the plantar fasciitis was still bugging him, but I don't think that's been any different than it has been most of the season. But they're all ready to go.
So the Blazers have come out pretty strongly and said that they're not interested necessarily in resting players. I mean, there have been a lot of folks, myself included, who've wanted Damian Lillard in particular to just to give it a rest. I mean, not to be rude, but come on, Dame, give it a rest. I mean, like you said, his foot has been bothering him. He's looked perhaps a little bit fatigued at times. He's been in kind of a statistically a mini slump. I think that's also kind of borne out with the eye test too. So do you notice that any of these players who may want to relish a little bit of extra rest but don't want to give the impression that they're resting during games, do they go at it any easier during these practices, or is it pretty much consistent from player to player as much as you could see, as much as you observed?
Well, it's hard to say because, I mean, for media, they kind of let us in at the end when all the major practicing is done and they're just kind of doing drills and coming over for talks. But Dame did confirm today that he will not be resting, and Coach Stotts reiterated that and said that, look, barring a blowout either direction, he's going to probably be playing his same load of minutes as well.
Do you guys think there's a conversation there to be had, or do you guys do you buy what Stotts is? I mean, I don't want to say like criticize what he's doing, but do you guys think this is the right move? I mean, I don't know. I don't think I disagree with him. Why not play the guys the same minutes that they've been getting all season? You head into the playoffs they've won a number of their last games. I think they're 7-3 in their last 10. They're doing pretty well lately. Why not keep some of that momentum going into the playoffs? I mean, they're gonna be the underdog in whatever series they end up in. So why not, instead of backing into the playoffs, why not head in there with a head of steam and see what kind of damage you can make?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And I will admit that my first kind of gut instinct is that I did want to see some of these players rest because you do have an opportunity to get everything as right as you possibly can. I mean, given some of these injuries, especially something that's a little bit more, maybe not chronic, but nagging, like a plantar fasciitis injury, is going to take more than a couple days rest to take care of. And so my first instinct was to really want to see them rest. But then as I thought about it more, you think about, which team do we know as the team that is most willing to rest their players and has been for years? The San Antonio Spurs, but they have had the same players and the same system, at least, for many, many years. They're cohesive. They know how to play together. The Blazers have only been together for a short time. And so for that, Chris, I can see your point that they do need to get those reps in before the playoffs.
Yeah, I think it's really valuable that, like you said, they get those reps in. But also, I just want to point out that I would much rather have them kind of in rhythm and maybe a little tired. I don't think they'll be tired, honestly, but, against LAC than well-rested against OKC, if that makes the difference right there. I mean, you want to have your best players making sure they lock up the seating.
For what it's worth, also, Greg Popovich, this whole resting thing, Tim Duncan's 30, 38, 39 years old. Tony Parker's 33, 34. Ginobili's 37, 38. I mean,
don't forget Andre Miller.
Andre Miller, 49. LaMarcus turned 30 last summer. I mean, David West, 34, 35. I mean, this is something that they've been doing more or less out of necessity when you have guys that age with that kind of mileage on their bodies over the course of their NBA career. Like, of course, you're going to want to rest those guys. When Tim Duncan, I can't remember what media source I heard this from. It may have been on the local radio, but when Tim Duncan, was 25, 26, the same age as Dame Lillard, I mean, he wasn't getting rested by Greg Popovich down the stretch. So this is something that is more of a recent thing in the last several years as the Spurs have, kind of aged, and it's kind of with the intent of, resting those guys who are a bit older, and the Blazers aren't necessarily in this position where they have any guys who are really that old that really need that kind of rest.
That's true, but there's also something else that comes into play, and you can tell me if I'm off base here, but it feels as though the call for the NBA to reduce the number of games in the regular season, those calls have been getting a little bit stronger and louder in recent years. And it's not as though the NBA has added any more games than they ever had in decades past. I mean, it's been 82 games since the beginning of time. But the thing I think about is that biomechanically, these players are larger than they have been in the past. They're certainly faster and stronger. I mean, if you put even one of the worst NBA players in the league today and you threw them, in a time machine, put them back in the 70s, I would imagine they would look fundamentally different than everybody else around them. So is there something to be said that as players do get bigger and faster, that maybe there is more of a need for that rest, even if the number of games that they play does not increase.
Well, I think, in the NBA, it's kind of like, and I relate this to tennis, is, back in the old days, you have a long wooden racket that's yay big, and you're just kind of whacking a ball back and forth, and it's competitive for what it is. But the NBA gets increasingly competitive every year, and it's just more and more strain on the players. And one of the things you have to stop and think about is, not only are the players taking it much more seriously, but especially during the off season, that's not really a rest period anymore. I mean, guys, that's when guys start to buckle down. They change their diets, they change their exercise routines. They put in two-a-days, and it's just not the same feel as it used to be. Not to discredit anything in the past, but I just think that there's such an immense pressure, both physically and mentally, on players now that they really. I mean, I don't ever want to advocate for less basketball because I love it. But I think they could definitely benefit from a shortened season.
Well, you brought up a few interesting points to me, because you mentioned the off-season training regimen. We're talking about diet. We're talking about exercise, all the things that guys do to get into shape. 50 years ago, dudes were smoking cigarettes on the bench in the locker room at halftime.
They need to bring that back right away.
Things have changed, in terms of advancements with fitness and training and recovery. So on the other side of that, the guys are bigger, stronger, faster than they've ever been. But in terms of recovery and the regimens that they can be on, that's also more advanced than ever. So, I mean, is that something? Are they on the same exponential growth curve, or is that something where maybe the advancement and the size of the guys and the speed is outweighing the ability to keep these guys healthy?
I would say, to answer the question directly, I think that the size and speed of the players probably does outweigh whatever advantage they could get from really honing in and tuning their rest. But just to focus another quick second on the rest part, I mean, you're right. It's gotten to the point where players, you see basketball players, football players are so concerned about adding as little unnecessary stress to their body as possible that they're not even walking anymore. They're taking, funky ducks and hovering around. If you had told me when I was a kid that part of the recovery from playing sports would be don't walk, I just would have thought that was nuts. But that is kind of what we're getting to at this point. So
it's pretty crazy to think about the way that things have really changed. And I'm kind of asking, how many games do you have to remove to be able to make a difference? I know that the NBA added a couple weeks onto the season this year in order to eliminate the number of 4 games and 5 night stretches that teams played and reduce the number of back-to-backs. So is this something where they maintain an 82 game schedule and they maybe shave off a bit more of the preseason and stretch out that season, so there's more travel days, there are more time in between games, more time to rest and recover? Or do you legitimately chop the amount of games that the NBA plays? I mean, what seems to make the most sense to you guys? Brandon, did you have any ideas here? You kind of mentioned this at the beginning. I'm kind of wondering, is this it? Are we looking at maybe taking off games, or are we spreading out the season here?
I think you have to do both, and you brought up the point that I was going to make, which is you could definitely, and I'm not the first person to make this point, tons of people have observed this, you could cut that preseason down quite a bit, turn part of that into the regular season, that stretches it out a little bit, you can space those games out differently, and then I think you still do have to take away some games. If you look at an NBA season, if you were to start it in late October, say, and it runs all the way through April, that's quite a bit of time. And even if you just take away 5 games, if you think about 5 games over that many months is not going to make a huge difference, even 10 games. So actually, this argument does start to get a little bit kind of fuzzy at the margins, because then you're going to have those counter arguments of, okay, if you're going to take away a significant number of games, double-digit numbers of games, say 10 games, 12 games, how much revenue are you losing? How are you going to recover that? I think that is a fair point.
That's absolutely a fair point. If you look at the influence that the TV contract that the NBA signed recently and how it's affecting the salary cap, it's fairly obvious that finances are one of the guiding motivators here, in the way that the teams, the players, and the owners collectively bargain when it comes time to come to an agreement. I mean, money plays a massive factor in this, and taking away games is taking away potential revenue for owners. It's taking away, the amount that the guys could potentially get paid. If owners are arguing that there's fewer games, they might argue that guys get paid less. I'm not seeing the NBA Players Union accepting any kind of agreement that pays the players less. I'm not seeing the owners agree on any kind of CBA that pays the owners less or gives them less potential for revenue. So I feel like taking games away is likely not going to happen because of the money. And I want to ask you guys, that aside, are either of you purists when it comes to statistics, like all-time stats? Because shortening a season to 76 games, that takes away 6 games worth of opportunity for guys to collect their stats every year. I mean, over the course of a career, guys could be playing 60, 70 fewer regular season games than the average guy did, a generation or few before them.
I think it's a small enough difference that, I mean, if you start comparing like, oh, this is pre the time where they chunked out a few more games, so these stats are more impressive than these stats. It's just, I don't think it's enough. But at the same time, I mean, stats definitely mean more and mean less as the game goes on. I mean, you look at games played back in like the 60s and 70s, like Wilt Chamberlain is just like DeAndre Jordan just back then. So as statistics progress, I don't know that I'd call myself a purist, but those are small things that you can take into account when making comparisons. But ultimately, if we're talking about 6 games, I mean, do we look at lockout seasons now and say, well, hey, this doesn't matter as much as this because it wasn't sustained for, 15 more games? I don't think
people definitely make that argument.
I think they're silly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, you think about trying to compare an era of basketball where there was no 3-point line, where people weighed, 30 pounds less, were 4 inches shorter, were like, X% less athletic. Even if the number of games that you're playing is the same, there are so many other variables that have changed over the decades to the point where it is nigh impossible to compare one era to the other already. I mean, that would be my argument.
Well, look at the most recent conversation comparing the 95-96 Bulls to the 2015-2016 Warriors, right? I mean, it's kind of a tired argument at this point, but if you look at what both sides use as the parameter for the discussion, you have that line of demarcation there of the hand checking rule. I believe that was in the early 2000s where that changed, and people are saying, if the Warriors had to face the type of defenses and the rules that the Bulls face, they wouldn't be able to do it, and likewise, the Bulls might not be able to succeed in the way that today's NBA has evolved. So I mean, there's all kinds of nuance that comes into these generational comparisons. I mean, you got the hand checking rule, you have the 3-point line, you have the ABA NBA merger, you have expansions, all through the late 90s and in the mid 90s as well. I mean, there's all kinds of points there where you could say that history for the NBA has kind of broken off and things have changed. So personally, to me, I think it's not that important. I think that fans these days have access to a nuanced enough amount of statistics and context that you could actually kind of make those interesting arguments, and it doesn't have to be black and white or anything. You can kind of look at all those things and take those into account. I think personally, to me, it kind of makes discussing these kind of things more interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the most important point that I think all three of us recognize is that when you're making comparisons, you have to make comparisons to teams and players between each other within any given season. You would hope that every team faces a similar level of adversity as every other team, be it with the travel schedule, be it with, things like injury, which, I mean, that's something that, Draymond Green of the Golden State Warriors had that comment a couple weeks back where he said that some of the losses that the Warriors incurred should have an asterisk next to them for one reason or another. Then folks like myself fired back. Well, then, your championship last year should have a giant asterisk next to it because the Cavs were missing Kyrie Irving, Kevin Love. So, but I think all of this boils down to that so long as you can compare players and teams to each other within a given season, that's really what we're looking for. So, which is to say that, you're not going to have an arena in Portland that has a 35-foot three-point line, and then you go down to Los Angeles and it's 33 feet, which, think of a sport where that type of thing happens.
Baseball.
Actually is baseball. Right, exactly. So you have these fields where, the fence is shorter or longer in different arenas. I'm actually surprised that they haven't really addressed that, but baseball's not my sport. So suffice to say, so long as you can compare within the season, I think that is really what we're going to be looking for as fans.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you have to be able to compare apples to apples, I think, in any kind of, discussion here. And I think, like I said, I think we're at the point where we're not picking up the newspaper the next morning and reading the box score. That's not how we're consuming our NBA coverage and getting our forming our opinions on the game. So I think
not you.
I think as things have progressed, we mentioned the progression with athletes and what they're able to do on the court and how they can recover. Things have also, progressed in the way that we consume the game. And so there's just so many different ways to talk about things that I don't think, personally, I think it sounds like we're all in agreement here that, lopping off a couple games here and there isn't going to really do anything to destroy the sanctity of the sport or the purity of the all-time statistics. I think we're all kind of in agreement on that. But, speaking of comparing and comparisons, we had an interesting conversation the other night at Blazers Edge staff dinner. We kind of mentioned this earlier, but David, you and I think Dan the Meringue were kind of, you kind of brought this up with him and a couple of other staff members.
I think that was Evans, actually. I'd like to give him credit there.
Oh, Evans Clinchy, our Friday writer. Check his articles out, blazersedge.com on Friday. He was the one, I think, maybe who inspired this conversation. Then with David, the Meringue, I later joined in. And I think it kind of spread a little bit to a few of the other staff members. It was kind of, I don't think any of us really came to any sort of a solid conclusion on this. So I want to continue this discussion with Brandon and you, David, on this podcast. So what it was, and Phil and Dave on the Blazers Edge weekday podcast kind of touched on this a little bit. So you can go back and check that out if you're interested in that. They talked a little bit about Al Horford, but the conversation I'm specifically referencing was Al Horford versus Hassan Whiteside in terms of which front court player should the Blazers sign this summer, should they decide to offer a max contract to an unrestricted free agent this summer in the front court. I personally have a different opinion than you and Dan had at Blazers Edge Night. Brandon, I'm not sure if you've been able to weigh in on this yet, but David and Brandon, I want to hear you guys personally make the case here for Al Horford, because I believe that's the one that you guys were both interested in the Blazers potentially signing this summer, given the option between the two.
Sure. Okay, so just kind of in a reductive sense here, Al Horford is turning 30 in June. I believe Hassan Whiteside's turning 27 in June, so he's not as young as people might think. I feel like Al Horford is a consummate professional, excellent veteran, solid three-point shooter. I believe he's actually shooting about 35% this year. He would give the Blazers a fantastic post presence on offense, which would take a lot of pressure off of the guards. And I think the Blazers defense, it's very system-based. So when you look at it and think like, okay, well, the first year that we had our last little rebuilding session, the defense was bad, and it kind of got better and better and better until this past season, not this season, but the last season. Blazers were one of the top defensive teams. And I think if you stick with the same pieces and force them to kind of adjust to that over a season or two, we're going to end up with a good defense here anyway. And as much as it'd be cool to bring in a guy who's known for, big blockbuster blocks, I don't know if that's a thing, but it is now. I feel like you're really missing out on a guy who's truly exceptional. And I mean, Al Horford's no slouch on defense either. I just feel like he's truly a great piece. And since the Blazers rebuild, I guess we say rebuild, I would say restructuring, has been a little more accelerated, and I think they could contend within the next 2 to 3 years, depending upon who they pick up. I would love to see them get a guy who moves the ball well, who shoots the ball well, who does everything at a high level and isn't a question mark in the attitude department.
So let me kind of widen the conversation here, because I want to give the listener context as to why, it's kind of boiling down to Al Horford, versus Hassan Whiteside in this conversation, because it opens up a bigger question to me, or maybe it started with a bigger question of, what kind of players this season are available, in free agency for the Blazers. I think, in the conversation of who's realistic for the Blazers to get, I think you pretty much have to kind of start and end with talking about unrestricted guys, because there's so many different variables when it comes to restricted free agency. And we've seen in years past, the Blazers have swung and miss a number of times offering guys restricted guys maximum free agent offers. So, I think it kind of boils down to who's available for the Blazers unrestricted. And then you kind of boil it down to, well, what would they need going into next season? And I think it, kind of long story short, we kind of get to the point where if you want an impact player in free agency, and if you're looking at who's available, it's going to come likely in the front court, based on who's available and team fit with the Blazers. And if you pare that down even more, and you kind of look down the list, Brandon and I read this off, I believe last week, but I'll mention a number of the front court players who are available in free agency this summer, and you'll see why it kind of comes down to Al Horford and Hassan Whiteside, because you're looking at a guy like Pau Gasol, Dirk Nowitzki, Tim Duncan. Those guys obviously aren't going anywhere. Ryan Anderson, Terrence Jones, Jared Solinger, Dwight Powell. I mean, Al Horford, in terms of power forwards, is the only clear impact unrestricted free agent that is likely to leave his team. And then if you look at the centers, you have Andre Drummond, who's actually restricted, Dwight Howard, Al Jefferson unrestricted, Joakim Noah, Zaza Pachulia, Festus Ezeli, who's actually restricted, and then Roy Hibbert, who's unrestricted. Hassan Whiteside in there, unrestricted. I mean, just pare it down, and these are the only two really realistic guys that it looks like the Blazers could and would sign, right?
Yeah, and actually, you mentioned the difference. You have a list of power forwards and a list of centers rather. I wanted to make the point that that's another thing in Horford's favor, is that I feel like his whole career he's been a power forward out of position playing center. And if we bring him in with the Blazers, he can do either. But if you stick him in at power forward, which is the Blazers' weakest position in the starting lineup, you can still run the pick and roll with Mason Plumlee. You can just kind of have a little bit more versatility with what you have there, instead of anchoring Hassan Whiteside in there, and then you have sort of this log jam with where do you put Mason Plumlee? I get he would be great off the bench, but at the same time, I think there are different ways to mix that if you have Horford.
So I want to fold in a listener question here. I know that we're talking about this as kind of a hypothetical, but this kind of speaks to the likelihood of that happening. This question came from Twitter, from Classic Robin, at Robin O. Boyle 1, asks, with the Blazers' unprecedented success, what are the chances of them landing a top-tier big in free agency? So, I mean, pretty simple question. Do you think the Blazers, we're talking about Whiteside, we're talking about Horford, talking about all of these different players, do the Blazers have a realistic chance at landing one of these two free agents or another top free agent big?
They have the need, and they have the record this year to point at and say, like, hey, come here. And, they're a young team and they're going places. But at the same time, without being overly pessimistic, they are Portland, and they do kind of struggle with this. I think it's realistic for them to sign one of them. I don't think if the Blazers signed, let's say they signed Hassan Whiteside to appease Chris, let's say they get him, and I don't think anyone's going to look at that and be like, oh my gosh, that happened? I can't believe it. How did they pull that off? That's amazing. I've never seen that happen before. Like, it could happen. But at the same time, I think that both of those players are in pretty high demand. And if you were to say, all right, well, X team over in sunny wherever wants to sign them too in a larger market, I don't think that the Blazers are going to be successful.
And just to really focus in on Robin's question, David, I wanted to ask you that likelihood of the Blazers landing a free agent. Do you think that it's markedly different because they will make the playoffs? Do you think that their chances of landing a free agent are really that much better because they're going to make the playoffs, as opposed to if they were to have missed the playoffs? I mean, how, in your view, does that really play that big of a role when these players are making decisions like that?
I mean, honestly, yeah. In some cases, it's not a huge deal. But if you look at a team that was supposed to be bad, in air quotes, supposed to, we have a guy in the running for executive of the year. We have a guy in the running for coach of the year. We have who's likely going to be the most improved player. We had a winning record. We're in the playoffs. This is a team that is young, well-built, well-designed, intentionally designed, and actually going someplace and going there really quickly. So I think if you have a guy who is in a situation where maybe, okay, they don't quite fit here, or they're really looking to be a part of a team that's going to win, not just immediately, but in the long term as well, yeah, I think that teams will give us a closer look than they would have otherwise. I mean, if you look at the Blazers and say, like, let's say they hit the Vegas mark, the 26 games, do you think Hassan Whiteside or Al Horford look at that and they go, yeah, I want to be up there in the Pacific Northwest? That sounds great.
No, I think, if you look at it, I think a lot of this really, has to do with money. I think guys will, given a max contract offer, they're pretty much willing to play anywhere, I think, for the most part. And there's obvious exceptions to that rule. I mean, LaMarcus Aldridge took significantly less money last summer to go to San Antonio, on down the line. I mean, there's definitely exceptions to that rule, but I think by and large, and you see this when guys stay with their team and they accept the mega extensions that they're offered by their team, I think a big reason for this is money. So I think all things equal, Portland, in the past, I've said that they don't look that enticing to potential free agents. I'm not sold on it historically speaking, but I have to kind of look at what Damian Lillard's kind of been able to foster here. I can't be so adamantly against pursuing top name free agents because just based on history, because Damian Lillard hasn't been given much of an opportunity, I think, to be that kind of a recruiter. And I think this year was his first year to maybe show the national scene, like, look what you can do in Portland. Look what I'm able to do. He signed that massive extension. He's on the cover of video games. He's got the shoe deal. He's got how many different freaking colorways are coming out of the D Lillard? I mean,
those Easter colorways were also not so great. And I'm speaking as someone who has the D Lillard 2 Aurora Borealis glow in the dark kind of purple. I used them today. They're awesome shoes. They have boost in them. You can just send my check right to me, Dame, for selling your shoes. You're there.
I think personally my favorite is the PDX carpet one, but I mean that all just is to say that Dame has shown, and CJ, I've been listening to podcasts. You hear him mention all the time on the Vertical podcast by Awoj. You hear him mention all the time on Zach Lowe's podcast. Bill Simmons brings him up. I mean, national guys are talking about a guy like CJ McCollum, who was barely on the radar his first 2 seasons. I mean, they've proven that if you can play well in Portland on an individual and both a team level, you can get that kind of a recognition. So, while I am, historically based, I'm certainly a bit skeptical on putting all your eggs in the basket of signing a restricted or unrestricted free agent and having that be plan A and banking on that. But I think personally, Neil O'Shea has shown, in past summers, that he's able to turn course as need be and be able to kind of do plan B or plan C, as it were. So I personally have nothing against pursuing a high level free agent as plan A, and I am a bit more convinced by recent events and the way this season has kind of folded out, that's a bit more realistic of an option for Portland this summer.
And so we're talking about free agents, and doesn't mean we have to end the conversation about that, but just to bring it back to another listener question and talking about in-house development. From Twitter, we have at Blazers526, and he asks what our thoughts were about re-signing Mo Harkless. My assumption is that this question comes around because Mo Harkless has shown as a starter with this lineup that he can be very, very effective. Chris, I know that you have lamented more than once that Mo Harkless doesn't have a consistent three-point shot, because if he did, that would be awesome. It's something that could come through development. So, I mean, the question is there, Mo Harkless, what are the chances that he comes back to Portland?
Well, the chances aren't immediately good or bad. I mean, we have a ton of pieces that are likely to be in motion here. I think it'd be good to re-sign him just because, quite frankly, like, he's got a lot of potential, and he's probably one of the cheaper guys that we have that we can hang on to right now, because, Alan Crabb's going to be a lot of money. Myers Leonard, if we try to retain him, he's going to be a lot of money, which is, I see Brandon shaking his head. There's a chance that, not even a chance, I say almost a certainty that other teams will be willing to pay quite a bit of money for him, and if the Blazers try to match, that's tying up money. But at any rate, I think
even with the news that he had surgery today, he's going to be out possibly 8 months. That would put his return time in December for Myers Leonard. Do you think that even with that, Myers Leonard's going to get a huge contract?
If he plays 10 more years, what's 6 months of summer? I mean, he's a 7'1" hybrid, like, weird stretch five. He shoots near 40% from three. His defense is coming along. He plays actually pretty well against some of the back-to-the-basket bigs. He's a strong defender. You saw the other night, even without him in there to guard DeMarcus Cousins, that gave us trouble. So I think, his defense doesn't get enough credit. I don't think he has, don't get me in trouble, Myers, if you ever hear this. I don't think he has the mentality to, like, really actualize all the potential that he has and really be like a star. I don't know, maybe he'll get there. But he's got a very unique skill set on a very ideal frame. And he's 24, 25, 24, something like that. Someone's going to pay him. They're going to pay him big. So if the Blazers don't want to tie that money up on Myers Leonard, especially with Dame getting more expensive and CJ eventually will probably require a larger contract as well, I see Mo Harkless as a guy who we can bring back and be very effective on this team for a lot less money, granted in a different role.
Now let me tie this all in kind of in a way that brings this back to the kind of the original question, but kind of addresses a number of points along the way, because I'm thinking with Hassan Whiteside here, right? So let's look at the Blazers front court rotation right now. So you have Ed Davis, Mason Plumlee, Chris Kaman, Myers Leonard, and Noah Vonleh, and then you have Mo Harkless is kind of doing a little bit of stretch four kind of work in there, and Al-Farouq Aminu is as well. So,
and of course Cliff Alexander,
doing work in practice. So looking at this, I'm just going to go ahead and say Chris Kaman walks this year, and they value his roster spot more than they value his leadership. All due respect to Chris, that's just, maybe that's conjecture on my part, but I don't anticipate him being back next season. Cliff Alexander, I'm not sure, but it'd be nice to be able to keep him around. We'll see what happens. But I think you look at signing Hassan Whiteside potentially. Okay, so that would mean that you have to choose between re-signing Myers Leonard or not. And if you do decide to re-sign Myers Leonard, you probably have to create some space there by moving around Noah Vonleh, Ed Davis, Mason Plumlee, or any combination there, right? I do think that just hear me out here. Re-sign Myers Leonard if you can get him at a reasonable rate, and I'm talking $12 million or less. If this is financially realistic for the Blazers, Hassan Whiteside on a maximum contract. Okay, so this means that you've chosen to keep Myers Leonard, so you're probably looking at getting rid of Noah Vonleh, Ed Davis, Mason Plumlee. Mason Plumlee is going to be on the books for $2.5 million next season. I think Ed Davis is about $8.5 million. I know his contract scales down as it goes on. Maybe he's about $7 million. To me, let's change our expectations for guys like Leonard and Vonleh, because coming in to the team, we're thinking these guys are either superstars or they're not worth anything. But what if we just say these guys have an incredibly useful skill set, both of them, and they can be important role players off the bench. If they're willing to accept those types of roles, I think if you look at that kind of a lineup coming off the bench, so you would have a guy like Noah Vonleh, Myers Leonard coming off the bench. Look at the weapons that those two guys bring to the game. Myers Leonard with his outside shooting and ability to spread the floor. Even if he's not making his shots, opposing defenses have to respect that. That opens up the floor. That's incredibly important. Look at Noah Vonleh, the athleticism that he brings. Hassan Whiteside at the starting center position. So basically, you're looking at getting rid of either Ed Davis or Mason Plumlee. And before I rattle on too much about this, I want to give David an opportunity to jump in here.
Well, I'm still really excited about Noah Vonleh. I think, he's nowhere near what he's eventually going to be. In order for him to be truly a useful weapon in present times, he needs to figure out some touch. Like it drives me nuts watching his gorgeous footwork to get to the rim and then having his shot be off by a foot. So that's something that he needs to fix some things before I think we can really count him as a weapon. But also, I don't think you mean to casually do this, but I don't think I would wave off Ed Davis so easily. Like I would love to keep him around. He's potentially going to get some fringe votes for six man. He's a fantastic player. He does a lot of things for this team that and I understand that you're just talking about potential ways to make things fit, but given how much Myers Leonard is likely to cost, I think a more realistic hypothetical is trying to find a way to place Ed in a position to succeed and cutting Leonard loose. But again, it's April, so
let me try at least to be a bit more concise about this, because look at Hassan Whiteside. Okay, so look at a few years ago, Robin Lopez, what he was able to do as the defensive anchor for the Blazers, as the rim protector, and 25, 29 minutes a night. Robin Lopez is a great individual defender. He's a great team defender in the context of the team defense that the Blazers had. I believe it was top 5, for most of his second season with the Blazers, if not, top 10 for the majority of the season until the injuries started to break down the team. I mean, look at Hassan Whiteside. This guy's averaging 3.75 blocks per game. He's one of the best individual low post defenders. He's one of the best rim protectors. In terms of the way that he alters the game, I mean, this guy is doing things that guys in the last 2 generations haven't done. On the defensive side of the ball, he's able to shoot 64% from the free throw line, so he's not a liability like a guy like DeAndre Jordan is per se. He's one of the better finishers in the league in terms of pick and rolls, if we're talking about big men, effective field goal percentage. I mean, this guy can pretty much do a number of things on the defensive end and slot him in to that team defense that Terry Stotts was kind of running more or less with Robin Lopez. I think Hassan Whiteside would excel in a team defense like that. I think that in terms of focus, I think Terry Stotts has done nothing to prove that he can't rein in a guy who has issues. I know he hasn't really dealt with many to this point, but we haven't seen any issues in Portland with that yet. So I think it's probably worth the shot. I mean, if we're talking about a guy who's a generational player on the defensive end of the floor, 3.75 blocks a game. When was the last time a guy did that? 1999, Alonzo Mourning. Hassan Whiteside is in the running for Defensive Player of the Year this year, and he's up there competing with guys like Andre Drummond for that kind of award. I mean, the way that he impacts the game, and that's not even to say anything about what he does in terms of rebounding. He's one of the best defensive rebounders in the league. I believe he's 31% in terms of defensive rebounding percentage, which is absolutely bananas. Overall rebounding percentage, he's not quite as good on the offensive end, but in terms of the way he changes the game, I mean, rebounding, he's insane. Blocking shots, he's insane. As a pick and roll finisher, the guy is crazy. And I just want to kind of, point something out here with rebounding. And this kind of makes me, I have to question which guy I would personally, under the hypothetical I laid out, would be willing to let go in terms of Ed Davis and Mason Plumlee, because I value Mason Plumlee's, his passing so much in the Blazers offense. But Ed Davis is an amazing offensive rebounder. And I think, if you put Hassan Whiteside in a rotation next to a guy like Ed Davis, next to guys like Noah Vonleh, Myers Leonard, I think on both ends of the floor you have enough to work with that Terry Stotts would really be able to have a ton of different dynamic lineups. Enter guys like Al-Farouq Aminu and Mo Harkless in stretch lineups. I mean, look at the type of front court rotations you could put around Hassan Whiteside. And if we're talking about ultra rebounding lineups, I just want to, to kind of tie up my point here, I just want to look at, some of the top rebounding teams in the NBA here, because I was kind of looking at it, and I wanted to see how, important rebounding was in terms of successful teams this year. And if we're looking at overall rebounding percentage, it goes Oklahoma City Thunder, San Antonio Spurs, Cleveland Cavaliers in that order. Then you have the Jazz, the Pistons, the Heat, then the Raptors, Warriors, and Blazers. So I think what we're seeing is that guys like Gobert, Drummond, and Whiteside, they can change the fortunes of their teams. Just by being that effective and taking up that amount of space, they're up there with teams like the Thunder, like a historically good team like the Spurs. Rebounding is one of the most important aspects of the game. I think if you bring in a guy like Hassan Whiteside, I think his potential, not potential upside, I mean, he's proven it this year. It's played out. If he maintains his focus like he has this entire season, I think that's a once in a not once in a lifetime. That's a once in every, maybe dozen years kind of impact guy on both ends of the floor potentially, and particularly with rebounding. I think that's something that we should absolutely be talking about here.
Chris, you brought up a bunch of good points, and I appreciate those. And now let me tell you why every last one of them is wrong. The thing is with Hassan Whiteside, and David mentioned this point earlier, that we were comparing the ages of Al Horford and Hassan Whiteside, that, Horford is nearly 30 and Whiteside, I think he's 26. And the thing is, when you think about Hassan Whiteside, you don't really have much of a memory of him except for the past couple years, except for he's 26 years old. But what is the reason for that? The reason is when he was a rookie, he fell right out of the league because he had attitude problems, spent a couple years overseas, came back to the NBA, has had a solid, I'd say 100 games or so. But even those 100 games have been marred by instances in which he couldn't control his temper, or where he just, wasn't in the game. You've had reports come out of Miami that there's been even some minor conflicts within the locker room and between players and Hassan Whiteside. And so when you're talking about throwing a maximum contract at someone, it is very difficult to do that if you're not quite sure if they're going to be consistent, if they're going to be a team player. And we had a similar conversation about throwing a max contract at a player like Myers Leonard. And whereas with that contract, you could find it to be quite tradable. If you are stuck with an albatross of a contract for a player that no other team wants because they know that they're not going to mesh well with their unit, well, then you are in a world of hurt. So for my money, I would definitely go for Al Horford. He's much more versatile. He has a much longer track record of being a good player. And he is, on the correct side of 30. And even then, has plenty of years left in the tank. So for my money, I'm going to go for Al Horford.
Yeah, and there are a couple different sides of the attitude issue. You can see sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. You can point to Andrew Bynum as being a big problem. I mean, of course, there were other injury things in play there. But I think it might be Bill Simmons, whoever soccer mom hater as he is, who said, each team can absorb one crazy player. And I'm all for the Blazers bringing on a big personality if they have big talent. So I'm not immediately opposed to Hassan Whiteside on the team. I just think Horford's a better option, especially in this regard, especially, as well as on-court play. But just because if you're looking for a character guy and you have a team of young players and the biggest thing they have going for them is being greater than the sum of their parts, and they've been preaching chemistry, chemistry, chemistry all year long. You get a guy like Al Horford in there who's going to make things better both in the locker room and on the court, as opposed to Hassan Whiteside, who we've really only seen, like you said, in about a season and a half, something like that, in Miami. And granted, he's been fantastic. I'm not going to take anything away from that. I think bringing him on would be a rousing success if the Blazers were able to sign him. But I just see the attitude being potentially an issue, and that's where the trouble comes in. Is like, it's not immediately something you can look at and say, it's black and white, yes or no. Like, oh, he has attitude problems, he's out. It's just that it might be an issue, and it makes him, in my opinion, a little bit riskier because he's not really a known quantity. He could still get better, but again, he is approaching 27 years old this summer. He's always had this attitude thing follow him around for a while. I mean, and then on top of that, I just wanted to point out that he ended up in the D League, I think, for a little bit, and like he said, played overseas. Not all of that was attitude. It's because he legitimately just hadn't put it together yet. And I don't know that if he comes out of Miami and is in a different situation, if that's going to hold as true as it has so far.
The attitude thing for me is, this is going to boil down to Neil O'Shea and the Blazers, front office staff doing their research. And so far, what I'm seeing is, if you look at every single personality that Neil O'Shea has brought in over the years, I mean, you look at pros, like Darrell Wright, a guy that got brought in like Gerald Henderson, via trade, guys like that. Neil O'Shea obviously values, having a good attitude or being a quote unquote high character guy. And to this point, he seems to be a solid judge of that kind of character. Now, what it boils down to me is, in terms of when we're talking about character and when we're talking, as fans or analysts, as it were, we don't know. We really don't know. And in today's, social media age, things get like, we don't really know, who to believe. Sometimes things get crazy coverage. I'm wondering if Hassan Whiteside is kind of a victim, a little bit, of the way that we consume sports and sports media. I mean, any little thing that he does at this point is going to end up on TMZ. Any kind of potential character issue is going to get overblown, and there's going to be think pieces into why he should or shouldn't, or be a max level guy this summer, or how his character issues have changed or how they haven't. I'm going to go ahead and say that if Neil O'Shea, sits down with him this summer and decides that he's worth the risk in terms of character, I'm going to trust him on that. And if not, I'm going to kind of trust him on that too. Otherwise, I don't really have anything to base that off of. I mean, we're looking at our reports about what's happened, and the guy, between the ages of 20 and 26, having difficulties at times getting along with teammates. I mean, that's not, to me, that doesn't sound too crazy. It doesn't sound too crazy that he's the kind of guy that could turn things around, being put in the right position. I just want to say, about Al Horford, if we're talking about risk, how many games has he missed due to that serious shoulder injury? And we're calling him 29. He turns 30 in less than 2 months. So he'll be 30 going into next season. Hassan Whiteside will be 27. It doesn't seem like a huge difference, but Hassan Whiteside has significantly less mileage in terms of how much he's played against NBA caliber players. 3 years, I think, is a much bigger deal than I think that has kind of been presented to be in the context of this conversation. And if we're talking about who Neil O'Shea has looked to sign, it's guys who are in that career arc with Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum. And I'm looking at a guy who's 30 years old, and I absolutely think in the short term and in the next 2.5, 3 years, should he stay healthy, I think absolutely Terry Stotts would be able to plug him in. I think, Al Horford is one of the most underrated front court players in the league. I think that his ability to score down low, also he has to be respected in the mid range. And recently, I think you mentioned that he can step out to the 3-point line. I think in Terry Stotts' system, I think he'd be absolutely amazing. I'm just wondering, are we getting a little bit overexcited about the progress that the Blazers have made this year and thinking that their championship window, quote unquote, has already opened and it's time to start bringing in guys who are 30, 31, 32 years old or who will be that old in the next couple of years. Personally, to me, I think we need to maybe take a step back a little bit and wait till this summer and kind of reevaluate a little bit in context, because look at some of the circumstances that have led to Portland being into the playoffs and the number 5 seed, the issues with injuries for other teams, chemistry issues with other teams. I know Portland has wildly outdone expectations by any number of people's predictions. I know it's crazy what they've done. I've been proven wrong. I think I predicted 32 wins for the team this year. Potentially winning 45 is absolutely crazy to me. But I think we need to take a step back and get a little bit perspective. I don't know if I'm personally convinced that the team's quote unquote championship window is open enough to commit to a guy who's 30 years old and has that type of serious injury issue.
So, are you referring to the pectoral injury that he sustained a couple of times? Yeah, I just wanted to point out that was in 2011, I think, and then re-injured again in 2013 or 14. But I don't know if that's necessarily a fair criticism to lobby, because we can look at Steph Curry and say, how many games did he miss due to that ankle injury? I mean, it was surgically repaired. It's been 2 seasons now of a healthy Al Horford that hasn't been affected by that injury, and there's no, as far as I can see, concern about re-injuring it. Granted, he is 30, but I don't think that's going to really factor in there. I do think you brought up some good points about maybe overestimating where the Blazers are. I mean, we can look at the Phoenix Suns from a year or two ago and say like they looked like they were on a pretty promising trajectory, and where they are now is, I'm not going to lie, I like Devin Booker quite a bit, but they're like this season, they're not where they thought they'd be a couple seasons ago. There were a number of factors that contributed to the Blazers being in the position they're in. But, I think at the same time, if we're putting this in the scope of, Al Horford or Hassan Whiteside, and we say, let's say we put Al Horford on a 3-year deal or something like that, just tossing that out. I don't think a 33-year-old is honestly that worthless. I mean, it varies player to player, but I mean, we saw LaMarcus just land a massive contract at 30 years old, and he's still going to be very serviceable by the end of it. So if we bring in Al Horford, who I think does a lot of things arguably better than Hassan Whiteside, who I think is less risky in a number of ways, I think that's just going to be positive. Like I say, I keep stuttering, but I don't think having him be, quote, old and injury prone as a guy who's, still in his 20s right now, but like you said, he's about to be 30. I just don't think that. Oh, go ahead, Brandon.
No, I was just going to say that I think that's you echoed a lot of the points I was going to make. I mean, if we're talking about a championship window, I don't think that any Blazer fan anywhere is under the delusion that the Blazers are, an Al Horford away from contending for the championship. And I don't think that that's the point. Like you said, David, 30 years old is not really that old. You look at some of these players are productive well into their 30s. It really does. It kind of depends from player to player. It seems that the most troubling kinds of injuries as players get older have to do with their lower extremities, with their feet, their knees, and maybe not so much the pectoral injury that you were describing earlier. And also, like you said, he's had 2 very solid seasons. I think that he's on track to play nearly, every one of the 82 games this year. Al Horford is. I think that what you have to look at this, a move like Al Horford, not so much that the Blazers are just one piece away from getting to be a championship contender, but you think about the players that you could add that help you get there, and Al Horford seems like the perfect kind of player that could do that. And also, I want to say that this concept that Neil Olshey is only trying to add players who are within Damian Lillard's age window, and yes, Neil Olshey has repeated that over and over again, but when push comes to shove, are you going to tell me that he's going to ignore someone because they're 30 and not 25, 26?
Yeah, he might.
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think so at all. It seems to me that the argument that you're making, Chris, I think would for me, resonate a little bit more if we're talking about someone who were maybe 33, 34, who had like one or
that's
two.
Crazy. No, you're adding.
No,
Look
hold on one
the
second.
other side. We got to talk about the other side of 30. That's the line there. Come on.
Okay,
No, I mean,
let me jump in here for just a second. And if we're talking about, let's say,
you got to break us up. You got to break us up.
let's say we're talking about consistency right now with Al Horford, yeah, and like how he's aged and progressed. You want to talk about his stats from this season to last season? You want to know something cool? Let's see, 2014-15, 15.2 points per game, 7.2 rebounds, 3.2 assists, 1.3 turnovers. You want to know what his stats are this year?
What?
Exactly the same. Down to the T.
He's a consistently mediocre rebounder for his position.
Fine. I mean,
well, he's playing in the front court with Paul Millsap.
I mean, if you look at the stats, his average rebound is like 6.1 feet from the hoop. I mean, this guy is not getting, the majority of his rebounds aren't even coming close to the basket. In terms of rebounding percentage, he's not even close to the top on his team. I think he's like 4th or 5th in the team. I mean, I know he's an incredibly consistent player across the board. I know a lot of people refer to him as Mr. Efficient. I know that he has an incredibly varied skill set offensively and defensively. He can fit within the framework of any team defense and be, more or less a plus guy defensively. But I'm looking at his rebounding, and I'm looking at the insane rebounding skills that Hassan Whiteside brings to the table. And I'm just seeing how much of a difference maker of an impact player. I think you got to risk it for the biscuit. I think throwing out a guy like Hassan Whiteside in a rotation like the Blazers could potentially have next season, they could dominate on the boards. I think this would be an incredible boon for the Blazers. I don't really know what more to say. I mean, Al Horford would be an amazing option, but I think sometimes you just got to swing for the fences, and I think Hassan Whiteside is one of those times, and I think it's worth it this year.
Then the problem, in my view, and I'm going to keep this as short as I can, if you're comparing these players statistically to one another, I think that you're right. I think that Hassan Whiteside is elite in certain areas in a way that complement the Blazers, and elite to a level where I don't think could ignore it. And the problem is that variable of how much in the game is he going to be. You talk about a team that so relies upon consistency like the Blazers do, and a max contract, and I don't know. That's statistically, I can see your point, but there are some intangibles, some things that you may think are arbitrary, Chris, but I think are not so arbitrary. That to me, that is the reason why I would take Horford.
I just want to say again, real quick, that both of these players are home runs. To mix sports metaphors, I realize we're in basketball, but landing either of them is, they're a slam dunk. This would be a huge win for the Blazers either way. I just, being the crotchety guy that I am, I prefer players that have experience, show that they can get it done night in and night out, that they're team players on and off the court. I just, like, Al Horford ticks all those boxes, and I think even you, Chris, said it earlier, is that he's just traditionally this underrated presence in the NBA. I think he gets written off way more than most.
Other than maybe Derek Favors, I mean, in terms of underrated front court guys.
Yeah. Derek Favors, I don't want to get too sidetracked, but he's great. I'm a huge fan of his game, and I think he needs more recognition.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that both Horford and Whiteside would be really great pickups, but let's be honest. I mean, neither one of them are Jerry Stackhouse.
I couldn't agree with you more. And guys, I think to kind of wrap this conversation up, I would personally be thrilled with either of these guys. I think Horford would fit in seamlessly with what the Blazers and Terry Stotts are trying to do. I think that'd be a huge win. I think, like you said, David, it would be a swing for the fences and a home run to get a guy like Hassan Whiteside if he can keep his head, screwed on straight. So it's an interesting conversation. There's going to be a crazy offseason coming up. The Blazers may even try to position themselves to somehow get into the draft. I mean, if we're talking about trying to sign some of these guys, they're going to maybe have to create some room in the front court. That might be shifting some guys around. That could potentially mean bringing in a draft pick or two. So maybe in the next few weeks, before we even get to free agency and after the playoffs, we'll be able to talk about the NBA draft. We don't really know at this point, but I want to let you know, David, it's been really fun having you on, and it's been a real challenge to present my case to you. You make a very strong and compelling point to bring in Al Horford this summer.
Oh, well, I'd like you to know, if I had more time today, I would have done so much research. I would have come with all the statistics and the fun stuff you did, which I greatly appreciate. You made some phenomenal points. And to reiterate, both these guys are wins. But yeah, I look forward to having this conversation again in the summer, where I can pour in a couple days of pouring over the stats.
Definitely, man. And you're welcome back anytime. I want to thank you again for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's been fantastic.
And we're all done with episode 127 of the Blazers Edge podcast. I'd like to thank you very much for listening to us today. I'd also very much like to thank Blazers Edge news editor David MacKay for coming on the show.
Yeah, that was awesome. David and I, as we said in the podcast, work together, so we're always happy to have him on. As always, our intro and outro music is brought to you by Odar. You can check out his stuff at soundcloud.com/OdarBeats. Be sure to tune in to the Blazers Edge weekday podcast with Phil Nasons and Dave Deckard coming up early this week. And for Chris, Lucia, I'm Brandon Goldner. And remember to always fill your ice trays with hot water.